My name is Harris Yedigaroglu, and I work for MB&F, this strange brand called Maximilian Busser and Friends. I know that brand sounds very unusual, and Friends sounds like a bit like a restaurant or a club or something else, but not a high-end watchmaking brand. But it's very important to us, this name, because it really translates some of the key values of the brand. The and Friends is really about the fact that we assemble teams of talent, individual, external talent. Of course, we have a core team, but around us, many external independents who are the very best in their fields. They have very special talent, very special expertise. And we create these project teams, which are amazing because we take all these different people and we manage to make something together. Horological machines, legacy machines, so yeah, what most people would call a watch to give time, but that's not what we're really interested in. We are not so much interested in giving time, we're more interested in creating what we call a mechanical sculpture for your wrists. That's how we consider a watch. The time is an extra benefit, but it's more about creating something that will create some form of emotion or memory or something about your past, about your future. That's what we're interested in. Usually from our childhoods, because that's a time when we were all super creative and our imagination was very, very strong. All of us, you, me, all of us, we were all super creative when we were children. And then when we grew up, our parents and our professors and our bosses told us to be rational and serious, so we lost some of this creativity. And we tried to go back to those childhood years to remember the dreams we had of spaceships and cars and airplanes and say, okay, that's what's going to inspire our next watch. That's what we like to do. And of course, it's serious watchmaking, but the creative spark, the inspiration is more emotional, more childlike almost. This piece, which was just launched a couple of weeks ago, is the HM9, and at CR it's making one of its very first public appearances. It's inspired by the 1940s and 50s, which were amazing in terms of design, because this was a time, the 1950s, before computers and before wind tunnels, which broke, if you like, the creativity and the freedom of many designers and engineers. When computers arrived and when wind tunnels arrived, those tools basically told designers how they should design an automobile or an airplane. Before that, they were free. They tried to make aerodynamic cars and airplanes, but they did it with their intuition, with their creativity, with their aesthetic sense. And they made some of the most beautiful cars and airplanes we've ever created on this planet. Beautiful curves, beautiful shapes, cars that looked fast even when they were not moving, you know? And that's what inspired this piece. If you look at the shape of the case, it's all about these curves, which are totally useless, but they're just so cool. And that's what inspired this piece. Technically, it's also quite complex because it has what's called a double balance wheel system, a double escapement system. So in each of these pods or capsules, you have an independent regulator. In the center here, you have a differential, which is actually making the average of those two systems. And that average is then what powers the hours and the minutes, which, yes, by the way, happens to give time. It's a driver's watch, so when you wear it on your wrist, the time is looking straight at you. You don't have to flip your wrist, yeah. And in this case, because mainly airplanes and cars were the two areas where designers had a lot of fun, we have what's called the Road edition with a speedometer type dial and the Air edition with an aviator type dial. Each one is limited to only 33 pieces. That's the HM9 floor. My love for watchmaking started very, very young. Two key moments. One was when I was very young, around 10 years old. I was living in the United States at the time. My grandparents from Switzerland came to visit us, and I had no idea, but they surprised me by offering me my first real Swiss mechanical watch. It was a rotary brand at the time. It's a brand that's not so famous anymore, but to me it was amazing because I would put it on and I can hear the tic-tac and it was glow in the dark, you know, with the Superluminova and so on. So I still remember that moment, by the way, when I received that watch, and that started really for me this love of watchmaking. That's the first thing. The second thing is much later in life when I took on my very first job in an advertising agency. My first monthly salary, which I ever made, was spent almost entirely on a watch. It was totally unreasonable because for the rest of the month, I ate bread and water basically, but I was a happy man. It was a Girard Perregaux, by the way, GP90, a chronograph, which I still have. I think everyone recognizes that for many years, this model continued, and maybe in a somewhat idealistic and maybe in some cases even arrogant way. They lost sight of the real needs of brands and the audience and the media and so on. So now it's time to rethink how these fairs function. It's no surprise that Basel is much smaller now, that even SIHH, after growing, is also losing 1 or 2 brands. So it's time to rethink these fairs. Now I have to say, as a small brand, not as a mega brand, these fairs still have, to us, a very key role to play, because it's amazing to have in about a week the watchmaking world, people from everywhere, including Mexico and everywhere else, concentrate in Switzerland for those few days. We can manage to see all our retailers, the press, even some public and so on. So if we manage to find a new format, a redefined format and so on, and maintain these fairs, it would be good news for us, for sure. Mexico has been, for many years, a key market. You've heard it before, and CR, by the way, plays a key role as well. It's really the, I would say, opinion leader, the market maker of the entire Latin American market to us. So even though we're talking Mexico, I think it extends beyond Mexico to the rest of Latin, Central, South America. That's what we find very interesting. A lot of the first evolutions we find, the first collectors in this part of the world who really got interested in independent brands started in Mexico. That's where we sold our first pieces here. That's where still today you have collectors who are very sophisticated, who go beyond the very well-known big brands and look for smaller brands like us. So Mexico has a very important role to play. The collaborations we've done with other people like L'Épée, who make these clocks, the robots and the spiders and so on. This brings something a bit bigger than just, watches, which is also a nice touch, I suppose. Hi Klokker followers, I just want to say a very big thank you for your interest in watchmaking. We're obviously delighted if you are interested in MB&F as well. Our new HM9, have a look at the review Klokker has put together. Watchmaking.